welcome to On the Record, where we talk to your favorite musicians about their favorite albums, like their favorite bands. And today, Andy, you want to talk about Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, killer debut album. So let's talk about why, how that album first came on your radar, or even the band.
Yeah, so Appetite for Destruction. The first thing I remember is a friend of mine I was in junior high at the time. I was in like 7th grade.
Yeah.
And he had the cassette in his Walkman, and I think I was meeting him like before class or something. And he was like, "Oh, check this out," So I listened to some of it, and I was like, "That sounds amazing." And then I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 days later, I saw the Welcome to the Jungle video, and
Yeah.
of course I had to go out and get the album. And of course, I was smitten by it. I made a copy of it for my cousin Scott, who was like a year or two younger than me, and his parents heard it.
Yeah.
And they got mad about, the language on it and stuff, which I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah,
But
sure.
and so they call Uncle Scotty calls my mom, and do you know what your son's listening to, and blah blah blah. And she's like, "Well, I don't pay much attention to his music or whatever." So my stepdad asks for the cassette.
I hear where you're going with it. Yeah. Andy, we lost you. Okay.
Anyway, back to the.
Hold on, Andy, we can't hear you.
How about now?
Okay. Can you tell it again, Andy? Because we weren't able to hear you.
Yeah. So I make a copy for my cousin, who's like a year or two younger than me. And his parents overhear it as he's listening to it. And they end up calling my parents, and my stepdad takes the cassette, and he goes and listens to it, and he comes back like a day later or whatever, and he's like, "Yeah, I've talked to your mother about this. You can't have this, da 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 da." So that kind of made me want it more. So I just so I just found a copy, from a friend or whatever, and taped it. And I listened to it probably more than I ever would have normally. And what I can say for that time, it's one of the first records that I ever heard that threw in more than one F-bomb.
Sure.
Like the language is all over it. And then some of the, the drug references and the sexual references, I'm not even sure I understood at the time. But I just knew that it was, the whole thing felt, it was very different. It felt, kind of dangerous, as compared to, say, it made Motley Crue look tame overnight.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then, of course, as you get older, you start really like appreciating the craft and the songwriting and all that kind of thing that went into it, because there's a lot of really cool interplay going on between Izzy and Slash, and all of the different vocal things that Axl's doing and all that sort of thing. So I mean, huge influential record for me for sure.
But what's interesting is I was doing my homework last night, prepping for today's show, and come to find out, Mike Klink, who produced this, obviously, he wasn't as well known. I mean, he apparently had worked with artists like Eddie Money, Haught, Triumph, and he was like an engineer at the record studio where they recorded this at the Record Plant in L.A. And that's how he kind of hooked up with him. But before he actually landed the production gig, he was working on the album as an engineer, and they were working with Spencer Proffer initially, who had had the big breakout album with Quiet Riot, a few years earlier, and they had actually recorded some of the songs that ended up on the Use Your Illusion albums, like Don't Cry, You Could Be Mine. I think I read they did a cover of Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel. These were all songs that were considered for Appetite but saved for the next album instead. And that shows you the importance of the producer, the fact that maybe he thought, okay, maybe a song like Don't Cry doesn't belong here. We need stuff that's a little more raw, And I think what ended up on the album was the best choice.
Yeah, because there's not a dud on the whole record, and you're right. There were songs they had around at that time, like they had November Rain in a more primitive form. They had Yesterdays, which was a song that Wes Arkeen wrote, and he also was co-writer on It's So Easy. And you're right. I've heard some of the Spencer stuff, like the arrangement for Welcome to the Jungle is really weird here in the yeah, Never Want to Come Down part or whatever.
Yeah.
Hearing that like twice in the arrangement,
Yeah.
where it's just once in the Mike Clink. It does kind of make you wonder how much they had at the time, and whether or not they act with Mike recorded more tracks. I would think if they did, that they would have come out on some sets and things like that.
Yeah.
As far as like B-side type tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, we know Shadow of Your Love obviously was recorded during that time. I don't know if it was exactly that session, or those sessions, but
that
they end up kind of
appeared
polishing that up.
That appeared as a bonus track when they released an anniversary edition of the album a couple of years back.
Yeah. So it had to have been recorded about the same time, I would imagine. And maybe was considered for the record. But you're right. I mean, it's almost like if they'd taken a track off or added a track, it would have changed the whole chemistry and flow of what Appetite was. It's
and it's interesting because I knew very little about who Mike Clink was before this album, but in doing the research, I find out, like I said, he's worked with Haught, Eddie Money, Triumph as a recording engineer, and I think part of the reason they went with him at the time because he wasn't as big of a name producer. And I was reading that Steven Adler had suggested, hey, why don't we get Mutt Lange, the guy that produced Def Leppard, and the record company rejected that off the back simply because they knew his price would be too much. They didn't want to bother spending the money. I mean, again, if they got Mutt Lange, maybe it'd be a little more slicker, maybe it'd be a little more of a different sounding album. And I do think, for whatever reason, going with a guy that wasn't as known at the time, it seemed to be the right choice.
Yeah. There's a part where I don't know if it's in Paul Stanley's book or it might be in Steven's book or something, where they go meet with Paul Stanley, and I guess Izzy and maybe it's Izzy and Steven, I don't know. A couple of them were like nodding out on heroin during the meeting and stuff, and Paul pretty much was like, I can't do this. I think it might be Slash's book, because I think he says that they did it just because Steven was such a Kiss fan. They're okay, well, we'll take the meeting. They didn't take it very seriously as far as working with Paul, but
yeah. And Paul Stanley, apparently, I read his book too, and he goes a little more detail about it, which is this. He said, because Kiss at the time wasn't wearing makeup. It was, the late 80s. And Paul Stanley was wearing these little more frilly kind of clothes, and Slash was kind of making fun of the way he dressed. And it got back to Paul Stanley that Slash was talking shit about him behind his back. And then Paul says in his book, he calls me, he has a nerve to call me this guy, Slash, knowing if I could recommend any guitar company that he could get an endorsement through. And I told him, hey, man, I heard the shit you were talking about me, man. And he slammed the phone down on it. He says, F you, Slash. And he says, but, years later they made up and they were friends. But, they weren't too serious about Paul Stanley producing. But apparently Paul really wanted to produce the album.
Well, I wonder if Paul remembers that Slash tried out for Kiss in '82 or whatever it was. They said he was too young at the time.
Yeah. Well, he must have been at that time. Yeah, I've heard the same thing about like Doug Aldridge before anybody knew who he was, but he was like 16 or 17 at the time, and same thing. They said, "Oh, you're good, but you're way too young. We can't take you on the road." Yeah. So, Andy, are you there? I cannot hear you. Okay. Well, cannot hear you. Can't hear you. Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been fun. We're losing Andy, but this has been let me see here. If I can get.
Are we back?
Yeah, we're back. Okay, so I don't know what happened. We lost you there for a while. But so tell me,
the screen froze.
Now, obviously, "Welcome to the Jungle" was the song, the big song, and then we know "Sweet Child of Mine." That was a song he wrote for Aaron Everly, who eventually would become his wife for a short while. Like you said, it's one of those albums where every song is killer. But what are some of your favorites, Sandy?
I really I like Anything Goes.
Yeah.
Think About You, I think.
Yeah. I was like My Michelle.
My Michelle's cool. My Michelle was really dark for that time.
And Mr. Brownstone, again, like you said, I didn't realize it was a drug reference at the time, but now knowing that, I love the song even that much more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever tried singing any of these songs, professionally, like when you were on stage?
So I've done "It's So Easy" quite a number of times, and that's not a tough song to sing. But and I've done "Brownstone," mostly I think in karaoke or something.
Yeah.
And then one time we actually tried just as a special like after party for a show that was going on in town.
Yeah.
We tried playing "Appetite for Destruction" in its entirety, and we rehearsed it. We only had one guitar player, so that made it kind of
Yeah,
difficult.
there you
But
go. Yeah.
yeah, it made it almost impossible. But we got through the album. I can't say we did it like justice or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was pretty early on in our career. And so we were just like, this would be cool. Let's try this. And so, we did these flyers that had the Zeroking logo and then the Appetite,
Yeah.
the Guns and the Rose and all that kind of stuff. Come see us do Appetite for Destruction in its entirety.
Yeah.
I don't think we try to pull that off now, but that's something we did early
Yeah,
on.
and apparently, besides the album and everything, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, there were two different album covers. There's, of course, the iconic one we all know now with the 5 band members, and then there was original ones, kind of like a girl on the street apparently was like a rape scene, but obviously the record company felt that was too controversial, and they went with the other cover.
Yeah, I'm figuring that probably had something to do with my parents taking the cassette away too.
Yeah, yeah.
When you open that and see that cartoon on the inside.
Yeah. Again, it gets people talking. And could you imagine if you were one of those people that had the original album cover? I mean, what a collector's item that must be.
Sure, yeah. Yeah,
Back
that's
then,
pretty.
back in the 80s.
I never even saw that in stores. I mean, of
Yeah,
course you see the inside,
yeah,
but as far as that being the cover, I don't think I ever saw that in the
yeah.
in the album racks or
It
anything.
must have been really a limited run. They must have stopped it. I mean, I even remember back in 1988 when Poison released their second album, Open Up and Say Ah, the controversy over the cat on the cover
The
having the
tongue.
tongue.
I
And
don't
then they
understand
had to
that. I don't understand why
change the
that.
eyes. And,
Yeah. Yeah,
and then
I don't understand why that was such a controversial thing at the time.
yeah.
I
And
mean,
what's funny is when years later, people, fans complain, hey, we want the original cover. And finally, they re-released it with the original cover. So I don't see what the harm was there.
yeah, yeah,
And Guns had the thing is they had the attitude, they had the image where the fu attitude. They didn't care what anybody thought. They and people really thought there was a real kind of street authenticity to what they were doing.
I think there was. I think they honestly didn't give a crap.
Yeah, yeah.
Didn't give a shit or whatever. I mean, and that was, that carried for a while there, especially the bigger they got.
Yeah.
The bigger they got, the more, especially with Axl, I think.
And what was interesting, I think maybe initially they were like a tight band, but I think like a lot of bands, the bigger they came, the further they drifted apart. I think especially Axl Rose became more and more isolated from the rest of the band.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he went through that whole thing where he forced the guys to sign the rights over to him before, before they go on stage with the Rolling Stones. It's like, okay, biggest show of your career, sign the rights of the band over to me.
I thought when I heard that, like, who would do that? I mean, it would be enough to do that, but then you think, well, okay, well, I mean, you think most people would say, well, I got to think about this, but and that was really the end of the band because, like you said, after everybody signed the rights to the band, kind of on his demand, one by one just walked away from the band eventually. Why wouldn't you when he was getting the lion's share of everything?
Yeah, and I think that Izzy leaving was the main. That's the one that hurt the most, I think, because their songwriting has never been the same.
He's kind of got a Keith Richards kind of approach to what he does, his songwriting, and I dig the fact that he's a lead singer, he writes, he's kind of one of those guys that can do it all, and yet in spite of that, he's kind of always been in the background.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously he was the one who wrote, so many of those classic riffs. Slash was more of a lead guy. I really think the riffs and the songwriting was very Izzy, and Tracy Guns would tell you that too.
Yeah.
Like I've read interviews with Tracy where he talks about how Izzy just always had the coolest riffs and really the coolest taste in bands, and he was the one who like introduced bands like Hanoi Rocks and Rose Tattoo and bands
Yeah.
like that, you know, to the guys, and really expanded their. He seemed to have a pulse on what was going on in other scenes around the
Apparently,
world.
you know, him and Axel were at one point the tightest because simple fact they grew up in Indiana together, and then they came
Yeah,
out here. And you're probably right. It hurt him a lot because, from what I understand, Izzy just kind of one day didn't even inform the band he was leaving, just kind of quit showing up. Very much pulled a Richie Sambora and
yeah,
just stopped communicating altogether and just went back and started doing his own thing. I tell you, the very first thing he did after he put out this album, Izzy Stradlin and the Juju Hounds, man, that was some like heavy Rolling Stones influence stuff. But I love that. That was a cool record, and I was surprised because, you know, a lot of people bought that when it first came out. I was surprised that he didn't go on the road and support it. Or, you know, he's put out like a lot of great solo albums, but just kind of they appear and you never know when it's going to be released. You just find out, oh, he has an album out.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if you remember in the "Don't Cry" video, they actually had the sign that said, "Where's Izzy?"
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, where's
Yeah.
Izzy? Where's Izzy? Yeah,
And then, you know, when they did their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame appearance, he didn't show up for that, and neither did Axel for that matter. But
yeah,
you know, Miles obviously sang
yeah.
that day and did great. Um, you know, Miles is
And
incredible.
I'll tell you, I mean, Appetite for Destruction, I think when you talk about Guns N' Roses, that's really the go-to album for everybody. I like it all. I like the Use Your Illusion stuff, but I think anybody that's into kind of real gritty kind of street rock, you know, that's the album. I mean, a lot of people don't like the Use Your Illusion stuff. Not that it's not good, but they think that's when they went pop. That's the MTV era, if you will. I mean, they were on MTV with Appetite, but you know what I mean. They're like, people tell you that the Use Your Illusion stuff is not as raw. Maybe I think it's a little bit of everything, is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, the arrangements on "Use Your Illusions" are certainly more grandiose. It's obviously more stripped down on "Appetite," and a lot of that probably was budget.
Yeah,
But I think they also wanted it to be a raw, in your face
yeah,
record, because everybody was going way slick at that point. You know, you had your Bon Jovi sound with all the
sure,
keyboards and the whoa 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 choruses and all that kind of thing, and
yeah,
Guns just completely just stayed away from that.
yeah,
They were way more Aerosmith,
yeah,
70s Aerosmith kind of stuff, and a lot of punk rock and um, you know, that kind of thing. Very
yeah. You
raw.
know, yeah, yeah, and you know, it's interesting because as I sit here and think about that those other songs that ended up on Use Your Illusion, um, can you imagine they would have ended up on Appetite? Here's the thing I ask. Okay, I think they were smart to just have like you know, Sweet Child of Mine is kind of the pop ballad or whatever you want to call it, the radio hit. But now
Mm.
I dare ask myself, like, if they had put November Rain, let's say, and even Don't Cry on Appetite, it would have been a very different album. And you almost wish, I kind of wonder which of those three songs would have been the hit. Because I could see very, as great as all three songs are, I could see maybe two of them getting buried by whatever the song would have been, you know?
Yeah, and if you had those sort of grandiose ballads like that, then moments like, say, the end of Rocket Queen, or you know, some of the more uh, I guess parts on, say, like Paradise City or something, might not have stood out as much, because those songs kind of stood out as bigger
Yeah,
um arrangements
yeah.
or whatnot on
Like
that record.
Paradise City is an interesting song because some people think of it as a ballad. It's not really a ballad, but it's that radio hit. It's an anthem. People, you know, a lot of times they'll play it, open the show, or a lot of times they'll play it when they're closing the show to get
Right.
people up on their feet. It gets the crowd going. So it's one of those songs that it can kind of be whatever you want it to be. and
Yeah.
and then November Rain is interesting because I heard some of the guys talking about, you know, after they came off the tour for that, and the band members started leaving one by one, like almost like November Rain kind of sounds like the band is breaking up. That's the band's, you know, coming to an end.
Or Estranged. Estranged even sounds more like that if you really think about it.
And it's
Like,
strange. It's strange, you know, you watch the video even, and it's such an epic video. But then when you stop and think about, isn't kind of that is, I think, when the band really did start falling apart. I don't know if it was just for the purpose of the video, but there's that video where Axel is like by himself for most of the video, and the band members come throughout the video, and they're never together.
Right.
I mean, that's, I think, when the isolation or the separation began.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, at that point, it turned from a 5-piece to like, more and more people in the band and backing vocalists and extra keyboard. That's when
Yeah.
Dizzy came in, and yeah, I don't know if Teddy Zigzag
Yeah, and
joined at that point.
I guess it was destined for them to get back together, at least with Slash and Duff. But I'll tell you, nobody was more surprised than me when it happened, because for the simple fact that I remember for years people would ask Axl Rose, and he was very sour on Slash for years, and he's like a cancer. I want nothing to do with him. And then I don't know what the turning point was, but thank God, And you got like three of the key members of the classic lineup together, and so that's something, I guess.
Well, Duff was actually the first one to start
That's what I
doing
mean. Yeah,
shows,
and then I think, I don't know, the fact that him
and
and
he
Slash
he must have communicated to Splash Man like, "Hey, Axel's kind of different, man. It's not like it was or whatever."
yeah.
And
And
plus, there's a whole lot of money on the table if the three of us
yeah,
get together.
yeah, and they'll probably and they'll get the lion's share. So even though Axl owns the name or whatever, I'm sure they came up with some kind of deal. Well, okay, if you bring us back, more people are going to come check out Guns N' Roses, and so the three of them, I guess, kind of come out on top.
Yeah.
Because even Slash and Duff, who hadn't been in Guns N' Roses for years, I bet they're getting a lot more money than even the new Guns, if you know what I mean.
Oh, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
they would have to. They'd have to like agree to some sort of either share of the profits or salary or something that would.
And I mean, could you imagine if you're one of those new Guns? You're like thinking, wow, okay, now more people are going to really start to come to the show. Now I'm going to get to play with Slash and Axl.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw one of those like I guess Chinese Democracy era shows. It was around 2013 or so.
Yeah.
And it was still cool. But yeah, it was a lot cooler to see the original lineup back together, the Hell Freezes Over or whatever. I saw them at a festival, and they still probably played, I don't know, 2.5 hours or something as a headliner.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's working. People are at least happy. Okay, we got 3/5 of the original lineup, so that's something. But it's just very interesting, like the difference a producer can make. I mean, you look at somebody even like Bob Ezrin did all those great Alice Cooper albums, and the reason he's such an important part of those albums is he co-wrote a lot of the songs with Alice. He's a musician, much more than just a producer. So some of these guys, and again, Spencer Proctor, super popular producer at that time. They tried to work with him, and maybe the attitudes did not sit, between him and Axl. I don't know what that was, but it didn't work out. And I'm not surprised to hear they did a cover of Heartbreak Hotel. Probably that's a thing he did, because I know when he worked with Quiet Riot. Okay, we had a hit with Come On Feel the Noise. We're going to do another Slade song, and that's something he was known for pushing. Okay, let's have a hit with the cover, and who knows, that could have been the breaking point. Maybe Axl said, hey, we don't need covers. We got, our stuff is good enough.
Yeah, another thing that Spencer did was he would find bands from Canada that had like minor hits on, even if, or whether or not they were hits or not, and then have the American bands, like Wasp. He did that with Wasp. He did it with somebody else. I can't remember exactly the band, but like he would take old Street Heart songs or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
and have the bands redo them or whatever. I don't think he did that with Quiet Riot so much, but he definitely did it with Wasp. Like I want to say his Cries in the Night was a cover of something. I don't know.
Interesting.
But yeah, maybe Spencer was trying to get him to do more stuff like that, and it just didn't gel or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, Mike Klink was not a huge producer at that time, but after this album, everybody wanted to work with him. And then as a producer, I'm sure his fees started to going up. And I mean, eventually he also produced like Molly Cruz album, New Tattoo. It wasn't quite a hit, but this Appetite for Destruction, it peaked at #1 on the U.S. chart. So for a debut album that people are still talking about 36 years later, I mean, that's quite a feat,
Yeah. Yeah. Didn't he do a Megadeth record too, Mike Klink?
I'm not sure. I have to look that up.
Might have,
but I know he said he worked with Triumph a lot, and Triumph was one of my favorite bands. But the two big Canadian bands, Rush and Triumph, they were big in the '70s and the '80s. But I think once the '80s came, for whatever reason, a lot of people forgot about Triumph, and Rush kind of surpassed them.
Yeah, yeah. I actually got to see Triumph at Rocklahoma in 2008.
Yeah. Well, Andy, it was fun doing this. I know you have a show to go prepare for, so I will let you get to this. But let me ask you before I let you go, because we're starting to do a lot more of these interviews talking about records that had a big impact. Is there another one
Mhm.
that you'd say that
I mean, there's all kinds of records that had huge impacts. The Black Album is definitely a big one for me.
okay?
AC/DC Back in Black might have been one of the first hard rock albums I
Okay, the
ever
reason
heard.
I ask is I like to welcome people back, as you know. I mean, you were recently on This Is Metal, and you're always a blast to talk to. So just kind of getting ideas for future shows. Black Album's one that would be cool for obvious reasons. I think Back in Black's great because that was kind of an end of an era where everybody didn't know who's going to replace the late great Bon Scott, and there's kind of like when Dio joins Sabbath, same
Yeah,
year, are we going to are we going to be able to remain successful? And man, they kicked it in the ass.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just throw some ideas at me, and I'm probably down to talk about any of them. So,
Hey, take care, my friend, and this will be going on probably about a week or so. I'll let you know once I have a date for it. You take care, Andy, and
cool.
good luck with the show tomorrow night. Okay,
I appreciate it. Thank you.
take care, buddy.
All right, bye bye.